And what I mean by that is they have a pretty good working knowledge of Torah. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That for them is the written Word of God. When they talk about the Scriptures, that's primarily what they're talking about. Genesis to Deuteronomy. That would include the Psalms, the Proverbs, the writing of the major prophets, the minor prophets, books we might call, some books we might have even called the Apocrypha. These are the books that are referenced by New Testament writers. When they talk about the Scriptures, they're talking for the most part about Torah. They're talking about what we call the Pentateuch, first 5 books of that Old Testament. Now, they don't have it memorized. A lot of illiteracy in this day. Not very many people can read. And one of the reasons not very many people can read is because reading would have been impractical. There was no printing press. So if you had the power to read, what would you have done with it? It's not as if you could go down to the library and rent a book or go to a bookstore and buy one. So you might have been able to read and never found anything to read. Most of the people that took the time to learn to read also took the time to learn to write, 2 skills that we take for granted as coming together that don't necessarily come together. And if you did that, you would have went into academia in one way or the other, because it would have been the only good use for a talent that was relatively useless in a world where you were starving to death 99% of the time. Why do you need to learn to read when you have such an amazing ability to listen? And the Bible is full of auditory learning. And so they hear voices from heaven, and they go into church and they hear the scrolls read out loud to them. And when Paul writes his letters, he writes them so that they'll be read aloud to the church at Ephesus and aloud to the church at Philippi and aloud to you get the point, because it's a listening. Why do you think Paul says in Romans, faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word? We read the word, but Paul doesn't talk about faith coming by reading the Word. He comes by hearing, because he's dealing with a group of people, 999 out of 1,000, which couldn't read if he had said faith comes by reading the Scriptures. They would have all been in trouble. You know, how are we going to grow any faith at all? So for Paul, it is by hearing. So it's what you hear that begins to build your faith. Nothing's really changed there other than that we can read, but we still can have our faith built by hearing. It's why when you hear someone get up and speak and pull out of the cool water of the Holy Spirit and pour it out on your feet or put it in a cup in front of your spirit man, it resonates with your soul, because faith begins to blossom like a flower as the sunlight of the love of the Father begins to be exposed in your life. All you did is sit there and hear. You just sit there and listen. You didn't even do anything. It's not even like you're actively doing anything, and yet faith begins to explode. So that begins to happen in the New Testament. It begins to happen as these begin. This begins to spread. And so, in this moment, something happens that doesn't look familiar to us. In fact, nothing in this story looks familiar to me. Moses, Elijah, Jesus shining like, well, I've never seen any of this stuff. But if you knew Torah the way they knew Torah, at least the highlights, there's something about this that looks rather familiar. I want you to notice that when Peter recognizes that it's Moses and Elijah, he already knows Jesus, but he recognizes Moses and Elijah, even though he's never had a picture of Moses and Elijah. But there's something about what these two bring to that mountain that reminds him we're dealing with a Moses and Elijah. We'll dig into that as we go. He jumps all the way back to tabernacle experience in the wilderness. His first thought is, capture the glory of God. Because for a Jew living in the Old Testament, the glory of God is captured at a place called the tabernacle or a place called the temple. God moves in a cloud by day and a fire by night. Now, God does this because you can see a fire at night and you can see a cloud during the day. And if the cloud is there, the Spirit of the Lord is there. If the cloud picks up and flies away, Israel was under fairly strict instruction to, as quickly as possible, all of the tribe of Levi was to tear the tabernacle down and follow the cloud. If the fire moved, you were to tear the tabernacle down and follow the fire. When it stopped, you were to go to where it was, rebuild the tabernacle, and then the cloud would sit down upon the back of the tabernacle, signifying that the presence of the Lord was sitting in the most holy place, squarely sitting on top of the mercy seat on the Ark of the Covenant in a room that only the great high priest could go in but once a year. That was heaven on earth. Why? Because where's God live? In heaven. Heaven On the earth. How did you know? How would you know heaven was on the earth? Where else would God be? He's in the cloud by day. He's in the fire by night. So if the cloud sets down and the fire sets down, where's heaven? Wherever the cloud is setting, wherever the fire is setting. And so you built a tabernacle to house the holy. The moment that Peter sees Moses and Elijah and Jesus, his Jewish brain runs back into a wilderness and grabs hold of that motif of tabernacle, and he says, hey, heaven's on this mountain. Whenever you find heaven on a mountain, you should house it. You should build a tabernacle for Moses and a tabernacle for Elijah and a tabernacle for Jesus. Now, nobody on the mountain says why. They don't have to, because they don't need to ask why. Because in their religious history, if you see God standing on the earth, house it. Build a tabernacle. And so Peter says, let's go build a tabernacle. But there's something even deeper that happens, because as you notice, go back into that text again, look at verse 7, and catch that third word, and let's not overlook it. And a cloud came. Because we don't just have Moses, and we don't just have Elijah, and we don't just have Jesus, we have a cloud. We have an Old Testament image in which there is a cloud by day and a fire by night, right? And the cloud signifies something. So I want you to go back with me to the last chapter of the book of Exodus. This is the second book of the Pentateuch, second book of what we call the Old Testament, second book of what Peter, James, and John and Jesus would have called the Torah. And I want you to take a look with me at the last several verses of the book. Exodus chapter 40, verse 34. Then the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tabernacle of meeting because the cloud rested above it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, the children of Israel would go onward in all their journeys. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not journey till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was above the tabernacle by day, and fire was over it by night in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. Now I want you to note that the book of Exodus ends by giving you the travel information that I gave you a moment ago. If the cloud moves, Israel moves. If the fire moves, Israel moves. God chooses to give you that information as the very last thing that the book of Exodus tells you. Now,